There was still one final trial ahead, a betrayal from an unexpected place, one that would shake his faith and nearly cost him everything again. And what about her? How did a woman once destined to be a doctor end up scrubbing airport toilets in a janitor's uniform? What really happened after the papers were served? And how did Malock go from heartbreak and betrayal to boarding a first-class flight beside the woman of his dreams? Now, the conclusion of the betrayal. Back at the coffee shop, Malock felt like he had traveled back in time. The hum of espresso machines, the low murmur of strangers talking, the smell of burnt coffee grounds hanging in the air. But he didn't notice any of it. All he could hear was the sound of her words echoing in his head like a tornado warning siren. "I don't want it to be said that you made me." The words cut deeper than she would ever understand. He stayed still, silent, stoic. She kept rambling, repeating that she didn't want to discuss their marriage right now. Only the business. Marriage counseling would happen Saturday, she promised. Malock sat there, his mind screaming for answers he knew she would never give him. How long had she been plotting? Who had been guiding her? How could she look him in the eyes after orchestrating such a betrayal? The weight of the betrayal pressed against his chest, made it hard to breathe. But he held it in, tight, controlled. When she finally asked if he had anything to say, Malock locked his gaze onto hers, unwavering, silent. He watched her physically shift in her seat, uncomfortable under the raw power of a wounded man refusing to break. It was like watching a dam hold back the oceans, an earthquake waiting to split the earth open. "No," Malock said simply. He stood up, still holding his frame, still mastering his emotions. He turned, walked away, and closed the door on the woman who had already abandoned him in spirit long before she did in body. Crying on the inside, raging on the inside, hurting beyond words on the inside. But on the outside, stoic, unmoved. He slid behind the wheel of his car, drove away, pretending not to steal one final glance at her through his peripheral vision. "I'll have my say on Saturday," he told himself. "I'll have my day." But that day never came. Friday morning, Malock tried to carry on with life. He opened the blinds to let the Arizona sun pour in. He washed dishes, letting the water run hot over his hands. And he played "Smokin' Out the Window" by Silk Sonic on repeat, mourning what was already dead. He thought about everything he wanted: a family, a legacy, a wife who would grow old with him. But how could their marriage survive this? The truth was, it wouldn't. It couldn't. As he rinsed another plate, he caught a glimpse of a man walking past the backyard fence, dressed head to toe in red. Something in his spirit stirred, a warning. But he shook it off. A minute later, a heavy knock sounded at the front door. Each step Malock took toward the door grew heavier, because everyone close to him knew to come through the back. Something was wrong. He opened the door, and there he stood, the man in red. "Are you Malock?" the man asked. "Yes," Malock replied, the pit already forming in his stomach. "Sorry, bro," the man said, his voice tinged with real sympathy. "You've been served." The brown folder felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Malock opened it. Divorce papers. The man lingered for a moment, offering a silent apology through his eyes. Malock nodded grimly, thanked him, closed the door. He stumbled back to the couch and sat down heavily, as if his legs had finally given out. No tears, just numbness Shock. She never intended to go to counseling. It was just another carefully crafted lie. Emotionally drained, Malock took screenshots of the divorce papers and sent them to his pastor. He sat there in silence. Wrecked. Saturday came, and with it his chance to stand before the congregation. Nervousness gripped him at first, embarrassment, shame. But then he remembered. He had nothing to be ashamed of. He stood tall, spoke his truth, told his story. Many were shocked, many were not. His pastors reassured him he was a good man, a man who had grown and would continue to grow. They told him that God would send him a true helpmeet someday, a real partner, one that would love him for the king he was becoming, and it would all come true. But not before another trial would come later, forcing Malock to leave his congregation for a season. But that's a story for another time. Fast forward 4 years, the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Malock was living, hand in hand with his new wife, Ezri, a beautiful, humble woman who had taken years to know before they even crossed certain lines. Patience had paid off. He was happier than he had ever been. Radiant, whole, restored. They were boarding their first-class flight to Turks and Caicos, their long-awaited honeymoon. As they made their way to the gate, Malock heard a small commotion near the women's restroom. He glanced over and froze. There, in a janitor's uniform, head down, being scolded by a manager for a poorly cleaned restroom, stood his ex-wife. Their eyes met, locked. A flash of sadness crossed her face first, then humiliation, then despair. Ezri noticed too. She gently rubbed Malock's shoulder, following his gaze. "Is that?" she asked, recognizing her from old photographs. "Looks like it," Malock said, his voice calm, unshaken. His ex-wife stared at Ezri now. This was no accident. It was a silent, psychological battle, one Ezri had already won without even trying. The ex-wife finally broke the stare, retreated into the bathroom, out of sight, out of pride, out of dignity. Inside the handicap stall, she collapsed onto the floor, curling up, weeping uncontrollably. Malock and Ezri boarded first class, hand in hand, a king and his queen, a story of redemption etched in every loving glance between them. At 12,000 feet, Malock sipped champagne. Ezri smiled warmly at him, her eyes filled with admiration for her protector, her provider, her superhero. And somewhere down below, the woman who once betrayed him was scrubbing airport toilets. How did she fall so far? How did she go from doctor to doormat? That too is a story for another time. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about Malock's journey through life, give us a like, comment, and subscribe. And send this story to someone who needs to be reminded. You can fall, you can break, but you can rise again.